Hi and welcome to the Mechanics of Healing. This is part 1H, the Digestive System, video 1. And today's topic is about the digestive system. The digestive system is one of the most important, if not the most important system in the body, so it is important to know how it works. When we deal with the healing of the body section, we will discover how the brain and the stomach work together in healing the body. They are made of the same basic material, so when brain surgeons temporarily remove a part of the brain in order to keep it alive, they sew it to the lining of the stomach, and this piece of information is priceless that will become clearer in later topics. This is a crash course in knowing your body and that in its anatomy and physiology. Enjoy the video from Crash Course. There are 2 videos in this topic, so thank you for watching, and be sure to watch the next part, 1I.
We all have our reasons for eating nachos at 3 in the afternoon. I happen to have my own, and don't ask, it's personal. But more generally, we all eat any kind of food to accomplish 2 simple things: to obtain the energy we need to stay alive, and to get the raw materials required for building all of our tissues and stuff. That's because when it comes down to it, both you and the food you eat contain those 2 same things. Both you and food are made of stuff, by which I mean matter, made of certain kinds of atoms, and both you and food have energy stored in the bonds between those atoms. So all living things need to take in stuff and energy and convert it into slightly different stuff and energy. And you can get some of the things you need pretty easily, like in order to get oxygen for respiration, to unleash the chemical energy in your food, you just have to inhale. But you can't just breathe in the stuff you need to build DNA or actin or a phospholipid bilayer. So, how does your body really acquire stuff? That's where the nachos come in. This cheesy, crunchy dish is made of all different kinds of biological matter like carbohydrates and fat and protein, and it contains a certain, probably shocking amount of calories, which is how we measure energy stored in the chemical bonds in food. So if I take like a 100-calorie bite of nachos, which probably with this much cheese wouldn't even be a very big bite, I can convert the chemical energy stored in those carbohydrates and proteins and fats to feed my muscle and heart cells and maybe like walk a mile, an activity that happens to use about 100 calories. But I can't just swallow the nachos and watch the lump of them travel straight to my heart or leg muscles. In order to actually use this food, I have to convert the biological matter into something my body can work with on the cellular level, which, as you know, is pretty darn tiny. And the work of converting the stuff in food into the stuff that's in my body is done by my digestive system. Human digestion occurs in 6 main steps, some of which you are intimately familiar with, others less so. But every step of the way, your body is working to reduce all the different kinds of molecules in food into their tiniest and most basic forms. The first step is probably everybody's favorite. When it comes to what your digestive system ultimately does, just think of it as a sort of disassembly line. You could have an order of nachos with the works. I'm talking beef and onions and sour cream and slices of jalapeno, and your digestive system will deconstruct it, both mechanically and chemically, 1 step at a time. It's gotta do this because your cells work best with materials that are in their most basic form. Your digestive system reduces food to that level in 2 main ways: by physically smashing it to smithereens and by bathing them, as much as it can, in enzymes. Enzymes are proteins that living things use as catalysts to speed up chemical reactions. When used in digestion, enzymes break down the large molecules in your food into the building blocks that your cells can actually absorb. Those large molecules are called biological molecules, also known as macromolecules, and everything that you eat, I hope, is at least partially made of them. And there are 4 main kinds. You got the lipids, the carbohydrates, the proteins, and the nucleic acids. Each possesses its own density of chemical potential energy, or caloric value. Like, for example, 1 gram of carbohydrate contains about 4 calories, while a gram of fat contains about 9 calories. But many of these biological molecules are polymers, or sequences of smaller molecules, and your cells aren't really equipped to take them up whole. What your body traffics in are those polymers' individual components, called monomers, and there are 4 main kinds of those those too: fatty acids, sugars, amino acids, and nucleotides. The simple idea behind the whole digestive system is to break down the polymers of macromolecules in your food into the smaller monomers that your cells can use to build their own polymers, while also getting the energy they need. And what your body needs to build at any given moment is always changing. Maybe you need new fat stores so you can have energy to run a marathon, or new actin and myosin to build bigger muscles, or more DNA so you can replace the skin cells you scraped off your knee when you fell, or more enzymes so you can digest more food to get more building materials. To meet your body's constant and constantly shifting demands, your digestive system requires a lot of organs that perform a lot of specific tasks to break down and absorb the right nutrient at the right time. Now, I'm quite sure that you're familiar with the key players here. They're the hollow organs that form the continuous tube that is your alimentary canal, aka the gastrointestinal tract, which runs from your mouth to your anus. It's worth pointing out that these organs are hollow because you are basically hollow too. Your digestive tract is really just one unbroken insulated tunnel of outside that just happens to run through your body and open at both ends. You're a donut. So the layer of stratified squamous and columnar epithelial cells that line your tract is actually a barrier between the outside world and your inside world, but it's a barrier that allows for the selective movement of materials between them. It's these hollow organs that do the actual moving, digesting, and absorbing of food, and they include your mouth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, and small and large intestines. In your mouth, in your esophagus, and at the other end of things at your anus, you have stratified squamous epithelial tissue, just like your epidermis, to help resist the abrasive action of chewing corn chips maybe. From your stomach on down though, the inner GI tract is lined with simple columnar epithelial cells which secrete all sorts of stuff and which absorb and process various nutrients. Most of these columnar cells secrete mucus, which lubricates everything and protects your cells from being digested by your own digestive enzymes. So the innermost epithelial layer of the tube is known as the mucosal layer, and it contains some connective tissue as well, which supplies it with blood. Surrounding the mucosal layer is the submucosal layer made of loose areolar connective tissue, which helps provide the elasticity that the tube needs when you eat a whole pizza in one sitting, and it contains more blood vessels. And outside that, you have the muscularis external layer, which, as you might guess, is where you find the muscles responsible for moving food through your tube. Beyond these layers, the GI tract gets tons of support from the accessory digestive organs like your teeth and your tongue, your gallbladder, salivary glands, liver, and pancreas. They're kind of like a pit crew, and they mostly help by secreting various enzymes that help take apart food as it comes down the tube. Together, these two groups on the digestive disassembly line work in 6 steps to destroy your food and release and recycle its nutrients. First, of course, you gotta introduce the food to your digestive system. What you know as eating or ingestion is basically just creating a bulk flow of nutrients from the outside world into your tissues. This is where the work of disassembly begins, in your face hole, which scientists call your mouth. Now, we're gonna get into the details of what happens here another time, but remember that food disassembly is both mechanical and chemical, so your teeth pulverize the bite of nacho or whatever, while your salivary glands begin that food's hours-long enzyme bath. But the food at this point is not nearly micro enough to be of any use to your cells, so you have to move that mush further down your tube. This stage is called propulsion, and its initial mechanism is swallowing, which, as you know, is a voluntary action, but then it's quickly turned over to the involuntary process of peristalsis. In peristalsis, the smooth muscles of the walls of your digestive organs take turns contracting and relaxing to squeeze food through the lumen, or cavity, of your alimentary tract. Waves of peristalsis continue through the esophagus, stomach, and intestines, and they're so strong that even if you were hanging upside down while eating your lunch and drinking your tea, the food would still soldier on, fighting gravity, and eventually make it to its final destination. Don't do that, though. There's other reasons why you shouldn't be upside down. Anyway, all of this shipping and handling mechanically breaks down the food even more, and even after it goes through the stomach and its gastric acid, the mechanical work still continues once it reaches your small intestine, as more smooth muscle segments push the food back and forth to keep it crumbling up. The goal of all this pulverization is to increase the surface area of that bite of food by breaking it down into increasingly tiny pieces to prepare it to encounter more enzymes in step 4, chemical digestion. Really, the actual process of digestion only occurs when the main action becomes more chemical than mechanical. And here, the accessory digestive organs, namely the liver, pancreas, and gallbladder, secrete enzymes into the alimentary canal where they ambush the mush and break it down into its most basic chemical building blocks. Like I said before, our cells prefer to do business in the basic currency of monomers like amino acids, fatty acids, and simple sugars, and digestion allows for the absorption of those nutrients as they pass from the small intestine into the blood by both active and passive transport. Once those nutrients are absorbed by your cells, you can finally use the energy inside of them or use them to build new tissues. The absorption of the nutrients is the goal of the entire process. But of course, it is not the end of it. Once your body has sucked out all the nutrients at once, indigestible substances like fiber are escorted out of your body. Yeah, I'm talking about pooping, or defecation. And that is the end of the digestive line, unless you are a capybara or one of the other animals who make sure that they get the most out of their lunch by giving the whole process another round and practicing coprophagia, aka eating their own poop. Now, you should notice here that some of the processes of digestion occur in just one place and are the job of a single organ, like hopefully you're only ingesting through your mouth and eliminating from the large intestine. But most of these 6 steps require cooperation among multiple organs. For example, both mechanical and chemical digestion start in the mouth and continue through the stomach and small intestines, and some chemical breakdown continues in the large intestine thanks to our little bacterial farm there. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to take you and your nachos on a stroll through your digestive system and see who's doing what, where, how, and why. But for now, I got some nachos to finish, so I gotta go. And eating those nachos, as you learned today, will provide me with energy and raw materials by first ingesting something nutritious, propelling it through my alimentary canal where it will be mechanically broken down and chemically digested by enzymes until my cells can absorb their monomers and use them to make whatever they need, and eventually, there will be pooping. Thanks to all of our Patreon patrons who help make Crash Course possible through their monthly contributions. And if you like Crash Course and want to help us keep making videos like this one, you can go to patreon.com/crashcourse. Also, a big thank you to Peter Rapp, Sigmund Lervogue, Mikhail Moden, and Jeremy Bradley for co-sponsoring this episode of Crash Course Anatomy and Physiology. This episode was filmed in the Dr. Cheryl C. Kinney Crash Course studio. It was written by Kathleen Yale, edited by Blake DiPestino, and our consultant is Dr. Brandon Jackson. It was directed by Nicholas Jenkins, edited by Nicole Sweeney. Our sound designer is Michael Ronda, and the graphics team is Thought Cafe. In the summer of 1822, a French-Canadian fur trapper named Alexis St. Martin was going about his business near Lake Michigan when he was shot by a hunter. Right in the stomach. The wound was severe, and everyone expected St. Martin to die that night. But he didn't. A local army doctor named William Beaumont kept him alive. In fact, Beaumont performed so many surgeries on the injury over the next several months that he decided, somewhat questionably, to just keep St. Martin's stomach wound open. St. Martin was left with a hole, or fistula, in his abdominal wall, which allowed anyone to see right into his stomach. Now, it's probably hard to work as a fur trapper with a hole in your guts, but Beaumont saw, or possibly created, an opportunity. He hired St. Martin, technically as a handyman, but really as a guinea pig. Over the next several years, and some 238 experiments, Beaumont recorded what St. Martin ate and what his stomach did to his meals. Sometimes they just skipped the eating part altogether and just shoved some food tied to a string right into the guy's gut hole. Beaumont took samples of gastric juices and had them analyzed by chemists, something no one had ever done before, and he also noticed that St. Martin's digestion slowed at certain times, like when he was sick or stressed. I mean, like beyond the stress of having a gaping hole in your abdomen. Through his somewhat questionable research, Beaumont discovered some major secrets of the digestive system, like that the stomach's extremely strong acids and muscular contractions break down food, and that some foods are more digestible or less digestible than others, and that the brain can affect the stomach. Beaumont's findings, as well as his methods of clinical observation, revolutionized the field of physiology. And St. Martin? Don't worry about him. He lived to be 83 years old, had great health, and a hole in his guts. Now, I sincerely hope that you can't actually see what's going on in your stomach, but let me tell you, the story there is epic. In your digestive system's mission to disassemble food into its tiniest, most basic molecular forms, the stretch that runs from your mouth to your stomach unleashes all of the mechanical and chemical powers at its disposal. It physically roughs up food, douses it in protein-loving, acid-triggered enzymes, reduces it all into a creamy paste, and as a bonus, because it likes you, it also kills a whole host of harmful invaders that, for whatever reason, found their way through your face and into your tube. But your stomach's not the end of the line for your food, unless it is. I mean, most of the time, everything from your mouth to your stomach prepares food to be absorbed by your tissues, but sometimes food finds its way back up. Yeah, in case the story of Alexis St. Martin didn't make you want to do this already, now I'm talking directly about vomiting. Let's begin with the beginning, with your mouth, aka your oral or buccal cavity. Now, we don't usually think of it this way, but that is where digestion starts, the mechanical and chemical breakdown of food through chewing and enzyme action. The inside of your mouth is lined with a tough, thick layer of stratified squamous epithelium that can stand up to lots of friction, like getting scraped by tortilla chips and like grilled cheese sandwiches that maybe were cooked a little too much on the top. Your anterior hard palate and the flexible posterior soft palate form the roof of your mouth. The hard palate provides like a hard surface for the tongue to mash food against, while the soft palate forms a movable fold of flesh that reflexively closes off the nasopharynx when you swallow, so food gets directed down your esophagus and not up into your nasal cavity. We all know what teeth are for, and you have roughly 32 of them in your basic types that help you masticate or chew your food. The tongue lives on the floor of your mouth and is basically just a big muscle that grips and constantly repositions your food as you chew. The resulting ball of mush actually has its own special name. It's a bolus, and the tongue rolls it back to the pharynx in preparation for swallowing. But that's just the physical action that goes on in your mouth. Just as much destruction is taking place through chemistry. The bolus is broken down with the help of 3 major pairs of salivary glands that churn out an average of 1.5 liters of slightly acidic saliva every day. More than 4 soda cans worth of spit per day. And all that saliva delivers enzymes like salivary amylase, a digestive enzyme that breaks down starches into glucose monomers. Now, once the food enters the pharynx, it's propelled by peristalsis into the esophagus, which, except for the little sphincter at the end that keeps food moving in the right direction, is really just a glorified laundry chute lined with smooth muscle. The only time you probably even remember that you have an esophagus is when something's stuck in there, or if you're feeling intense heartburn, or if you just puked. But moving on. Assuming you have not just puked, then the bolus moves on to Dr. Beaumont's ticket to fame, the stomach. The stomach is the stretchiest part of your digestive tube, capable of holding 2 to 4 liters of material at any given time. 2 to 4 liters! That is a lot of nachos mixed with spit. But of course, it's much more than just a storage tank. It's lined with the same 4 main layers found through most of the GI tract: the mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, and serosa, but it's got a few special modifications. For one thing, the muscularis includes an additional layer of smooth muscle that gives it extra strength, allowing the stomach not just to hold materials, but to actively smush them around. And the inner mucosa is made up almost entirely of mucus cells, which produce a protective coat that keeps the stomach tissues from getting digested along with your lunch. This inner lining is dotted with millions of tiny, deep gastric pits, which lead down to tubular gastric glands. These glands, in turn, contain various types of secretory cells that brew up some of the most potent chemicals in your body. For example, your stomach has parietal cells that release hydrochloric acid, a substance more acidic than battery acid, which lays waste to most of the bacteria, viruses, and other stuff that could make you sick. It also helps denature or change the shape of proteins to make it easier for enzymes to digest them. And maybe more importantly, when the hydrochloric acid is combined with pepsinogen, an inactive enzyme that's secreted by another kind of stomach cell called chief cells, the mixture creates the protein-digesting enzyme pepsin. Together, this superpowered acid and protein-hungry enzyme can annihilate nearly anything they encounter. This was apparently something that Beaumont observed firsthand by dropping hunks of meat into a cup filled with St. Martin's personal gastric fluids. He watched the gobbets of food dissolve over time, which is partly how he discovered the stomach's role in digestion was as much chemical as mechanical. But with so much mind-blowingly powerful stuff at your stomach's disposal, somebody down there has to be in charge. So your gastric glands also contain enteroendocrine cells. These cells release regulatory hormones like serotonin and histamine, which act locally to trigger other cells to, say, release more acid or contract muscle tissue. And when the time comes to tamp the action down, they secrete other hormones like somatostatin to inhibit secretions. And then there are G cells, which produce the most important hormone for stimulating gastric activity, gastrin. Most signals that increase stomach activity get the job done by increasing the secretion of gastrin, which then stimulates the release of other gastric fluids as well as stomach muscle activity. Now, if the smell of baking cookies has ever made your mouth water and your belly grumble, then it might not surprise you to learn that these stomach secretions are ruled by neural mechanisms as well as hormonal ones. In fact, stomach secretion occurs in 3 phases based on where the food is sensed: the brain, the stomach, and the small intestine. The cephalic phase is the one ruled by your brain, and it kicks in when you first see, smell, taste, or even think about food. That sensory input gets relayed to the hypothalamus, which stimulates the medulla oblongata, which then taps the parasympathetic fibers in the vagus nerve. From there, the signals are sent to the stomach with the word that, hey, we think that maybe cookies are on the way, so you might want to prepare yourself. Now, this is a conditioned reflex, so it only works if you want to eat the food in question. If I happen to be super full or not feeling well, or somebody puts a pile of squid eyeballs in front of me, the cephalic phase isn't gonna happen. And no offense if squid eyeballs are totally your thing, they're just not my thing. But say I eat the plate of squid eyeballs anyway, because, I'm trying to be polite. Well, even without the cephalic warm-up, when that food hits my stomach, local mechanisms, both neural and hormonal, jumpstart the gastric phase. For the next few hours, as my stomach grows distended from the food, it activates stretch receptors that again stimulate my medulla and get my vagus nerves to tell my stomach to turn up the juice. At the same time, the secretion of gastrin is activated by other signals, like the rise in alkalinity caused by the stomach acid getting neutralized as it does its job. Conversely, as stomach acidity increases, it inhibits the release of gastrin. Now, the third phase of gastric regulation, the intestinal phase, speeds or slows the rate in which your stomach empties so that the small intestine doesn't get too overloaded with too much acid or with the creamy paste that your stomach turns your food into, also known as chyme. Now remember, not a lot of absorption actually occurs in the stomach. The stomach is more like a decontamination tank. Sure, it pummels your food down to a paste, but it's also where your body tries to obliterate any nasties that could make you sick. As long as food is still in there, your body has a chance to kind of size it up and feel it out, and it reserves the right to eject anything that it feels is potentially dangerous. Lots of factors can trigger the stomach's urge to purge or vomit, but the most common are simply ingesting too much food or eating some kind of irritant or toxin, like those produced by bad bacteria, too much alcohol, certain drugs, or unappealing foods. Of course, if you've ever puked in a moment of trauma or stress, you know how emotions and anxiety can also trigger your stomach to launch its lunch. That's the brain influencing the cephalic phase of gastric regulation again by sending extra fight-or-flight signals to the stomach. Beaumont noticed this mind-stomach connection whenever St. Martin's digestion was affected by illness or stress. Something you'd think he'd have felt every time that doctor came at him with some meat on a string. If you were able to keep down your lunch today, you learned how mechanical and chemical digestion start in the mouth and continue in the stomach, where food is pummeled by acids and enzymes and turned into chyme. We also looked at the stomach's cephalic, gastric, and intestinal phases of digestive regulation. Thank you to all of our Patreon patrons who help make Crash Course possible, not only for themselves, but for everyone through their monthly contributions. If you like Crash Course and want to help us keep making videos like this one, you can go to patreon.com/crashcourse. Also, a big thank you to Sigmund Lervogue, Alexis and Brian Carpenter, and Luke Peterson for co-sponsoring this episode of Crash Course Anatomy and Physiology. This episode was filmed in the Dr. Cheryl C. Kinney Crash Course studio. It was written by Kathleen Yale, edited by Blake DiPestino, and our consultant is Dr. Brandon Jackson. It was directed and edited by Nicole Sweeney. Our script supervisor was Valerie Barr. Michael Aranda is our sound designer, and the graphics team is Thought Cafe.